on our contract with Viridor of £40,000, and then there's also the £40,000 saving relating to the closure of Usk Recycling Centre. Then quickly moving on, highways ops, there's a few different areas there, some small staff efficiencies. We looking to see a small saving on our winter maintenance because we're incorporating a new bit of software that will hopefully allow us to improve our pre-salting runs. And there's some other small areas relating to earning income from plant hire reduction, and also one for provision of recycled tarmac to other local authorities. We do own some tarmac recycling machines, and we're looking to put those to use to either offer the service to an authority or let them use our machine for a rate. And the last couple, school meals price increase. We're going from £2.45 to £2.50. That should create £20,000 worth of additional income. Obviously, the majority of that will just go against offsetting increase in costs. Staff costs, so we've got pay award, we've got incremental uplift, and also assumed grocery costs. And then we've got £48,000, and Pete mentioned before, relating to discretionary fees and charges. I don't know if the fees and charges report was attached to this, but that's mainly just general increases in our licenses and general charges. And the last one we have, again, it relates to social services, but it's a fee and charge increase of £189,000. I haven't got the detail of that, sorry, because it's not my area. I think that's it. So I'll hand you back to Pete or open up to questions. Thank you.
Okay, Phil, did you want to say anything as Cabinet Member? It's great that you're here this morning, but just give you an opportunity just to add anything before we open it up to questions.
I don't think so, Chair. It's been more than adequately covered by Peter and Dave, so I think we'll just leave it for questions, if that's all right with you.
Okay, before I open up to questions, obviously members need to be mindful we are scrutinising the overall budget. We're here to scrutinise the functions within our scrutiny remit. Yes, you may be able to touch on the broader overall resourcing strategy, but we need to be mindful of the chief officers that we have here. You know, if we're going to dig down on minutiae in social care and ALN in terms of education, you're not going to be able to get the level of response you may want. So just to be mindful of that when you're thinking about asking those questions, okay? Councillor Davis, you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Apologies, because I'm going to go back and forth, because a lot of it is, and I'll try and do it in some sort of sequence. The 2% saving against individual school budgets, I've got a couple of questions here. Firstly, were the head teachers consulted before that decision was made? And was the proposal subject to an impact assessment? Yeah, I've got lots of them, so if you want to write them down. There's a freeze on the employer's pension contribution. How will that affect the employees' pensions over time? We're talking about increasing significantly a number of fees, and we talk about comparisons with other local authorities. Can you supply us with any details of those comparisons, how we compare with other councils in terms of those charges? The financial documentation also talks about a favourable income as a result of house building completions, and obviously that goes into the next LDP. But in terms of the investment strategy, have we considered, we spoke some time ago about a house building company, or I think Phil called it a different name, a development company. But obviously that would give us income in terms of council tax, but it would also give us income in terms of revenue from sales or whatever, and have we considered those? What concerns me, Chair, is that and I appreciate the current situation, and you know, we support the fact that we want this RSG changed, and you know, we'd love to have this massive bundle of cash from Brexit and all those. But I'm a bit of a sceptic personally, and I think only the pressures are going to increase over time, not decrease. So I want to refer to this document which talks about the capitalisation directive, and that mentions in it there are a number of items in there which not only I think apply to that, but also things. What I want to ask is, has the authority actually considered partnership working or any of the possibilities, for example, in preference to cutting school budgets? And I'm talking about preparatory work, examples of projects we could be sharing with other local authorities, preparatory work, sharing back office and administration services, collaboration to free up land, funding of cost of service reconfiguration, sharing chief executives, that's a good one, driving a digital approach to the delivery of more efficient public services, aggregating procurement, improving systems and processes, setting up alternative delivery models. So the basic question is, there's a number of things there, and I could think of a lot more as well. Have we, in view of the fact that, let's assume that things are going to get worse before they get a lot better, been considering other things other than just looking at the traditional things we look at of cutting school budgets and whatever? Because certainly there's no indication that the pressures that are on social services, and when I asked the Chief Officer of Social Services about this, it looks very much like the trends are for it all to increase pressures rather than reduce. So what are we doing in terms of the other things? In terms of what initiatives are we bringing in terms of sharing with other authorities, looking at house building and those sort of things, so to try and negate the pressures which are going to increase and not decrease?
Okay, thanks very much. If Councillor Davis, can you just put your microphone? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. So I think I've captured it into 5 discrete questions. So 6 discrete questions. So in terms of your first point around individual school budgets, were the heads consulted? Yes, they were. The Chief Officer for Education, CYP, met with heads in advance of the draft budget proposals being brought together. That was fed into discussions with Cabinet, and before it drew its conclusions around the release of the draft budget proposals that you've got in front of you. Clearly, that conversation has continued. Feedback has been received from parents, from schools, others, and that feedback will be taken on board. Phil, I don't know whether you want to touch on, make any further comment on that, and specifically around individual school budgets before I carry on.
Yes. We have been looking very, very carefully at that. I've made it very clear at all public meetings, and particularly to the head teachers meeting, that Cabinet's got no appetite for imposing the 2% reduction on ISBs. And we're looking at all possible measures to try and create headroom elsewhere, so that we don't have to do it. And if and when we get to the stage where we're confident that that we have that headroom, we can then consider our position on it. But it is one of the budget proposals that we've made very clear that we will retreat from as soon as, or if, and I stress the word if, headroom can be found elsewhere.
Okay. The second question was, if I understood it correctly, was to do with what I'd alluded to earlier. So we're taking the ability to freeze our employer pension contributions for a period of 2 years, which is giving us a £370,000 benefit as part of the budget proposals. Your question was about how that affected employees. It doesn't. The employee contributions are determined by the LGPS, Local Government Pension Scheme regulations. They remain unaffected. This is a matter of discussions with the actuary in terms of how the fund overall is performing and how our employer contributions are affected. In terms of the third point, which I think was centering around how we compare with other local authorities on fees and charges benchmarking, I don't know whether Dave wants to offer any comment, but I think my sort of general response to that is that when managers are assessing charges that relate to their individual service areas, they will clearly look at the local market. They will need to understand the cause and effect of price increases, price sensitivity in the market, etc. And yes, they will look at how they position themselves against other local authorities. But equally, given, and it depends on the nature of the fee and the charge, they will also look to compare with how they sit alongside the private sector, and particularly when they're in competition. So it's difficult to provide levels of granularity because each budget holder and each manager will be taking a slightly different assessment depending on the nature of the fee and the charge. In terms of council tax, point made around housing completions, and I think the question was centering around, the point that's been discussed in the chamber, and there was a motion put forward, I think accepted, and work has been undertaken in terms of undertaking a feasibility and assessment around the setup of a development company. That work is ongoing at the moment. We are having to be a little bit careful in terms of timing on that because, as members will all be aware, in terms of the next LDP, the LDP strategy is making its way through to council in March, early March, and that's not the end of the process. So from a commercial perspective, I would want some level of clarity in terms of the opportunities that present to the council, away from the planning authority, the opportunity that presents to the council in terms of looking to either go alone or in working with others to develop housing. The conversations that have taken place of late are to ensure that it doesn't blunt our intent, is to make sure that we have a very clear grasp in terms of what we can and can't do within the confines of the authority. So we're making sure that with the strategic sites that we've got in the current LDP and that we are taking forward, that we're not constrained in what we're looking to try and cut our teeth on. And conversations of earlier in the week have drawn conclusion that I think we're pretty safe in terms of moving forward with those sites, and being quite ambitious and creative in that as well. And that will position us well then. And as I say, as the LDP looks to crystallise itself, we can then draw those conclusions around the development company. And just to highlight the point, that doesn't also apply to housing. It also applies to commercial development, because another key feature of the LDP is not just housing; it is also our employment sites. Your next point, I'm not sure whether it was a statement or a question, but in terms of Welsh Government funding and this level of pessimism, optimism applied to funding that we may or may not get in the future. Our modelling is prudently set. I think it will only be a case where, as is the case, I think, in part, but not rehearsing all the conversation around the funding floor and being the worst funded authority, but the 3% funding that we are getting through the provisional settlement sits over and above what we had modelled. And the reason for that is because we had modelled at a prudent level, and that's right to do so. The final point you made was around our use of the capitalisation direction and where we're able to displace costs from revenue to capital and associated with service reform. You rightly pointed out those aspects of the guidance, which are quite, and again, credit to Welsh Government in terms of, providing quite a good array of opportunities that we may want to explore. But I can provide you absolute comfort and reassurance as we went down through that list, we were comforting ourselves, and we brought officers together from right across the authority, all service areas, in looking at that piece of work. I think looking across at France's, whilst you've got an extensive brief yourself, and with mine, I think we're pretty comforted that we are exploring all the conversations that we need to. If we think that collaboration, partnership is the right solution, we are already in those discussions, or we have already entered into those arrangements. You touched on procurement. There is work already underway, as you know, Councillor Davis, and I think we're due to meet with you and the Chair shortly, before, I guess, bringing something back into E&D Select on that one. So I think that, I don't have to go through each of the points that you touched on, but I'll provide you comfort and reassurance that each of those avenues are being suitably explored.
Sorry,
I
Councillor
don't
Davis,
want to hog the stage, but I mean, I think there's a lot of very good work going on, and we're talking about the right things. And when I attended the City Deal Scrutiny meeting for Paul in Caerphilly, Kelly spoke about opportunities for grant funding within that system as well. So I think, as the Economy and Development Committee, we would like to be assured that, we are looking at all aspects of those things so that we put Monmouthshire in pole position when it comes to taking advantage of that city deal. I still have concerns about the pressures, which I think are going to increase significantly. So it's very important that our economy, our business strategies are pushed to the maximum, I think. And very briefly, even though it doesn't come under your remit, well, I've got a very large bee in my bonnet about the inadequacy of the council systems in terms of allowing councillors to monitor against plans, targets and things. It's very difficult to access information. So in terms of transparency, I think that is something we need to look at as well. Thank you. I'll shut up now, Chair. Thank you.
Chair, there was
Thank
a
you.
point about partnership working and shared offices and all that sort of thing. Yes, I think it's pretty well documented that we do look wherever it's possible to either outsource our departments to neighbouring authorities. Revs and Bens is already there, council tax collections already there in Torvine. We provide services to other people. Legal services are also contract out, and we're getting an income off that. No, we haven't looked to share chief executives, but we are in certain cases looking at federating schools where we have joint heads. So there's an awful lot going on, and always has done. Nothing new about this at all. But at every opportunity where we can see that there's a definite saving to be made, we will do it. The big problem that you have with an awful lot of these partnerships is that other authorities just suddenly decide that they're going to withdraw. If you think of outdoor education, Gwent Music, that there's numerous examples where we've suddenly found ourselves on our own because our partners, so to speak, have just pulled out of it. So you've got to be very, very careful about trusting your departments to other authorities, just simply because you could be left high and dry.
Thank you. Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Chair. I got several questions. One comment, first of all, is the following on from Councillor Davis mentioning the pension contributions by the employers. I'm not too happy to see pension holidays, having experienced that in the past in the industry I was in, that employers taking pension holidays created an actual evaluation, which meant that some of the schemes became not satisfactory to provide pensions. That's just a comment on that. I think we should really monitor what's happening there. We're taking you through some of the topics. I'll start with the street lighting. I have asked for a full report from the street lighting to the next Strong Communities meeting, because I don't quite understand where we're going from. I know where we're going to, but I'm not quite sure where we've come from, where we've gone from sodium lights with 100% cost, down to sol lights with maybe a 60 or 70% cost, to LED lights where we got maybe 20% cost on the original 100%. It doesn't add up to me, or I'd like to see how it adds up to me, that we've got a pressure of 25,000 this year. I don't see where I can't see where the pressures have come from if we're making savings year on year based on the fact that we did have grants for some of these installations. I'd like more development on that, as I say, with the Strong Communities Committee. I've raised that question through Hazel to follow it through, and I think we've got a meeting coming up in the next number of weeks, but that's another matter. The other question is the waste collection. I understand that the waste centres, I understand there's a consultation going on to try and reevaluate to see where we're going with that, particularly in the Usk Waste Centre. So I just leave that be as it stands. The PTU, Passenger Transport Unit, in the last 12 months, there's been several new buses bought. I don't know how much they cost, I can't remember. But it also meant that our maintenance as well, with the aging fleet and costs of external maintenance, have gone up. We don't seem to be pulling in the commercial side of things. We need to provide more school transport with the catchment review coming on. So with a pressure of £60,000 proposed based on workforce efficiency, etc., how long can we support a passenger transport unit in its current form when we're going to have pressure year on year on year? And somewhere along the line, a lot of these passenger transport units, buses not what, are probably going to be failing, and we need to put more money in as a capital spend. So how long can we justify running a PTU unit within house? They're my main questions, but I am pleased seeing in the report that you don't intend to increase Meals on Wheels from £4.50, whereas I read in the press this morning that another local authority at £5 a head is going to get rid of Meals on Wheels. So I'm pleased that we're keeping Meals on Wheels. So I'd like some comments about PTU particularly, and as I say, I've asked for more information at a special meeting on street lighting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eason. You'll start on pensions. Yeah.
I know it was read as a comment, but I'll just make a comment back on the point around pensions and the pension fund contributions. So just to be clear, and as you'd imagine, it's a lot more complicated and a lot more detail to it than this, but at a headline level, and with the actuary undertaking its full triennial, every 3-year actuarial valuation, that's just been concluded, and where the position that we're at, pension liabilities are increasing. You know, anybody who reads the press is familiar with that situation. However, what we have seen is that the investments, which are significant, multi-billion-pound investments in the pension fund in terms of the pension assets held, they have outperformed significantly over that period, far in excess of the increase in the pension liabilities. So the actuaries, in conjunction with the pension fund administering authority, which is Torvine, they have a very clear strategy in terms of a funding strategy for the pension fund, and making sure that they bring the pension fund back to a position where it is fully funded. We are ahead of the funding strategy at the moment, which has afforded us that opportunity to be able to just take a moment to just pause. We are still paying significant employer contributions. It is simply the fact that they have been held at that level for 2 years. They will then be reassessed, and we will go from there. But going back to your point, Councillor Eason, making sure, and I guess learning the lessons of the past, making sure that we have got a very good funding strategy, which in the long term makes sure that we have a sustainable and viable pension fund.
Yeah, street lighting. Yeah, we'll certainly do a report. So if Hazel can remind us, we'll bring a report to next, or to a Strong Communities Select. Regarding the grants, they're not actually grants, they're interest-free loans. So we've been taking advantage of some interest-free loans over the last couple of years. I think the last tranche that we have now, we will have replaced all our infrastructure with LEDs. So we're not seeing a huge saving yet, because obviously the saving that we're making from the energy, we're actually using that to pay back the loan. But the beauty of that with these LEDs is that they should last 15 to 20 years. Now the loan is only repaid back between 10 or 12, 15 years. So what we're actually doing, we're actually future-proofing our kit at the minute. But obviously the benefit we will see is when we start repaying the loans, and we'll start seeing the benefit from the reduced energy consumption. But it also does help towards offsetting the energy increase. So going on to the 25,000 that we've built in as a pressure for next financial year, like I said before, historically the street light and energy budget was always flatlined. So you'd have the same amount year on year, even though your energy cost would be going up 20-25% a year. So this is just built in to help us cover that potential increase. Hopefully, like I said, with the introduction of all our LEDs, our energy saving will get bigger, and we might not actually need that, and we'll be able to offer it back up as a saving in next year's account. But we'll certainly do a report. We'll list out all the different loans and how long they got left, and the potential benefit that's going to come from them.
Because the further question I asked on that was the longevity of the system in terms of switching off overnight, and I understand there will be dimming systems in place to reduce them overnight, so we could possibly keep the lights on overnight. I know that individual councils have the position to request single lights at the moment, but in the long term, the longevity of the scheme with LED lights, I've asked for more information on that. Yeah.
Just picking up on the Ask Recycling Centre question first. So yes, you're correct that Cabinet have made the commitment to hold that decision taken on the 20th of December in abeyance at the moment, whilst a further consultation and engagement exercise is undertaken. We will be issuing a broader consultation with regards to household waste recycling centres and recycling to everyone, not just to the community of Usk and its surrounding areas. And we will look to gather data with regards to the use of the site, the facilities at the site, the waste composition, to gather further information for Cabinet's consideration. So the impact will need to be revised within the budget before we bring forward the final papers, and obviously the saving that's currently proposed within the budget will now need to be readjusted. So that's a piece of modelling work that we'll do to update that. With regards to PTU, we have got two arms of the passenger transport units. We've got a commissioning arm and we've got an internal operations arm. The operations arm that we run is where the market cannot provide services for us. So when we go out to tender via the DPS or Dynamic Purchasing System process, we put all of the tenders out there for the various routes that are operated across the county. And I think there's in the order of nearly 300 routes that are operated across the whole of Monmouthshire. We, as a council, in the operations arm, only operate a very small proportion of that, but there are particular areas in the county, Caldicot being a good example, where there isn't an operator who has bid in successfully or even wanted those routes. It is an area of increasing pressure. That's due to increasing pupil numbers, increasing in demand of parents and pupils that want to access the service. We do have an old and ageing fleet, so we're looking at whether we can purchase vehicles in a different way. We have also just gone out to tender for our maintenance, so our maintenance of our coaches. We do most of our minibuses in-house, but we are going out to contract on both of those. So we're hoping that in the new financial year, depending upon the costs that come forward as part of this new tender, our maintenance costs will also go down. But it's a very complex service area with increased costs from increased demand, ageing fleet, high cost of maintenance, and we are facing ongoing significant pressures in this service area.
Can I come back on one comment on that? In terms of the smaller units, the minibuses, particularly the grassroots service, my understanding of the grassroots service currently can only operate in a 15-mile radius of a location. That is a way, it prevents the full use of the other system. For example, you can't get to Cwmbran from Caldicot. I've asked on numerous occasions for the office to look at the feasibility of, with the Welsh Government, to increase that, particularly in the rural Monmouthshire. People in Monmouth can't get the Chepstow to stroke association meetings. There's that little extra bit in the end. And also the grassroots bus service is increasingly being used by residents because we're losing the local bus services, and that's going to increase. But I hope to see that the local bus service will increase as well. So can all that be sorted out in the mix in terms of the grassroots bus and the service to the public locally, generally?
So I've just agreed at the programme board to commission a study into exactly that. So the public service buses and the community transport grassroots operations, so that we can have a full review of all of that across the county. Your points are well made, and ones that we have noted as well. We have some public bus services that aren't used very much. We have some of our grassroots services that are utilised a lot, and it's how we can maximise the use of both the public bus services in the county and the grassroots service. It's also things like the booking systems for the grassroots service. They aren't very easy to use. Sometimes when you book on them, you're on them permanently, and actually that person isn't there to be picked up. So it's the whole system needs a complete review. And within the budget mandate papers that are associated with these documents, you will see that we have included grassroots in terms of route optimisation, and that's what we're referring to there.
Thank you, Councillor Easton. Just for clarity, Francis, just in terms of that waste management recycling review, is that going to come to stronger communities? I know that if the chair was here, she would ask, but just to ensure that there's going to be some element of scrutiny process there.
I'll discuss that with Carl in terms of timing and sequencing for bringing forward anything back from that. So thank you. I'll take that as an action.
Okay, thank you. Further questions? Councillor Becker.
Right, I'll start with a couple on schools. It says that we're going to cover all teachers' pay, so that's great. Does that mean we're not going to see any enforced redundancies in the schools in the coming year?
That's a matter entirely for the governing bodies of the schools. Staffing is devolved to each individual governing body.
Which brings me neatly on to my next question. Have we actually defined the legal position for governing bodies of schools in regards to setting a deficit budget? Because apparently we're not allowed to, and it's the governor's responsibility, which would lead to, I know for the, I'm governor at the Dell, and I know plenty of the governors there will leave if they feel that they're in a position where they can't set anything other than a deficit budget, but they're going to be held legally responsible for it.
I'm not sure. They can't set deficit budgets anyway. And those who have gone into deficit have all got recovery plans. But quite how the rest of that question manifests itself, I'm not sure. This is a joint stronger communities economy and development, not a CYP. So.
And I appreciate that. It's going to be difficult to answer that question in this setting. Then, what we're saying. It has been asked before, so I was just wondering if there had already been an answer that had been brought about. That's all.
I'm just wondering that there might be an opportunity for a written response there.
Okay, that would be nice.
And just for clarity, I think you may have declared an interest there in terms of
your
governor's
I believe we've covered before that being governor, although you don't need to declare it as an interest, but
okay.
I can be corrected on that if that's
okay.
If that's
I'm sure the monitoring officer
will
will send me a message very shortly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The other one is one of the budget intentions regarding the schools is the possibility of school loans to those in deficit situations. That sounds to me like giving a credit card to somebody who's in debt. Can you explain to me what the logic of that would be?
I'll do that one, Chair. The idea is that that schools that are in deficit can access up to 10% of their annual budget and utilise that to repay their deficit. That then is repayable, probably interest-free, but we are going to have to borrow some of the money. Some of it we'll do internally, but we're going to have to borrow some of the money. So there will be a cost to that. But anyway, the intention is to try and do it interest-free. They can then spread that over 10 years, or up to 10 years. They can repay it quicker if they want to. The big advantage is, and let's just take a relatively straightforward example. If you've got a school with a deficit of 400,000, we've given all the secondary schools an extra year. They're supposed to repay any deficit over 3 years. We've extended that to 4. So they're, you know, just to say simple maths, they're going to have to pay, should we say, 100,000 a year, or something that works out in that area, to get back into recovery over that period. If they take a loan to wipe that out and spread it out over 10 years, they can substantially reduce the amount that they've got to find each year, and therefore any savings that they were going to make, potentially they can reinvest in standards or extracurricular activities or whatever they want to do. As I said earlier, they don't have to do it over 10 years. They can pay it quicker if they want to. So it's given schools the opportunity of being far more flexible with their recovery plans. If they go into deficit once they're on a loan basis, the authority will take back their budgetary control from them. So they're not allowed to go into overdraft once they've cleared it with a loan.
Well, I commend the notion of it being interest-free. I think that's excellent. But at the same time, it seems difficult to imagine a situation if you're in a downward direction where you would be able to afford the repayments on top of what you're already doing. But I appreciate the notion of it being interest-free.
If I can just add to that, Chair, you'll find that the majority of them are not in a downward direction. They all got recovery plans which they're successfully sticking to. I won't say it's been easy, but they are. Schools go into deficit for all sorts of reasons. It's absolutely not to do with bad management. It's invariably to do with fluctuating pupils numbers, different grants, all sorts of external factors that schools have to manage that aren't necessarily within their immediate control at the time.
No, I would agree that it's outside of their control. In fact, I think our schools do an absolutely incredible job of managing their finances and providing the highest quality of education they can, with an ever-shrinking pool of resources. So I really do, I applaud them on that. In terms of other questions, I have two which are really related to, part of what we do. This is much more within our remit, you'll be pleased to know, Chair. So part of what we do in economy development is we look at the wider picture and how things sort of interact with each other. And I worry about how we're defining the pressures when we look at these budgetary settings. So let's take the Ealing judgment as an example. Because of the Ealing judgment, we're in a position that we can add 20% extra, a VAT charge to community groups that are using our leisure services. Now, I'm not going to argue the toss about whether we can do that. I would say that the judgment was intended to be non-discriminatory and also to compare commercial and non-profit services, and it's supposed to be taken on a case-by-case basis. I think we're applying it wrongly, because what we're looking at is the bottom line of the amount of money that we're generating, and what we're inadvertently doing is pricing out community groups from using our services, which is in direct contradiction to both MCC's and the PBS and Welsh Government's wellbeing objectives right at the beginning of the budget outline. So I feel that we're not taking into the account, we're looking at the bottom line and we're not taking into account the pressures of what we're doing to wellbeing. Similarly, beyond that is the parking set of pressures. We talk about the income being the parking pressure. I'm slightly confused there, so you can answer. This is going to be a daft question that you'll easily be able to answer. My understanding was that we couldn't raise revenue from parking, so why is income from parking the primary concern of how we measure whether parking is working or not, and how that informs our parking strategy? That makes no sense at all. Plus, my own ward has 5 car parks in it, which the prices are going up, and I also have the train station, but we're actually looking at our transport strategy, we're looking at our well-being priorities, and we're looking at our house building strategy, and we're dissuading people from using the train because we're increasing the car parking charges. You know, it doesn't feel like joined up thinking. It feels like the pressures that we're listing against the savings are actually drawing on the wrong metrics. So perhaps some reassurance and some answers in those regards.
Okay, so I'll touch on the point around Ealing ruling in the first instance, and then in terms of car parking, Francis, is you okay to cover that off? Because it's a matter in terms of being couched within the car parking strategy that's due to be looked at. So Francis can elaborate on that now in a minute. In terms of the Ealing ruling, yeah, point well made. We've had representation through David Davis MP in recent weeks around that very point. It's being looked at and worked through at the moment. I guess in part an unintended consequence, in part. But you're absolutely right. There are groups and associations who previously would have had the benefit of being able to recover the VAT, and now, because obviously of the situation we're now in post-Ealing, they are not. So we're just working that through at the moment, just to understand the cause and effect, those groups affected, and we will look to consider, a response to that in due course.
With regards to car parking, the increases in car parking charges were matters that were agreed last year as part of last year's budget setting. It has taken us time to implement those changes, and they now have started in most of the car parks. The ones that are currently free, I think there's 4 that were proposed to have new charges introduced. We are ordering signage for them, so they haven't been implemented yet. Going forward, we have put forward a pressure of £183,000 budget pressure for car park income, because we have seen year on year that we aren't achieving the level that was originally set. Obviously, these income targets for car parking are set on various different models of what we think we can achieve. It's very difficult to know what cars are going to come in and how long they're going to stay there. So there are income targets that have been set that we haven't been able to achieve. In last year's budget, we committed to doing a car parking strategy and review, and that is a holistic review. It's not just about the income, it's about the use of the car parks, it's about the impact of car parking on town centres and town centre footfall, it's about how long people are parking in the different car parks, it's the introduction of EV and EV charging spaces, and how that integrates into the wider transport network as well. So we are dealing with the current set of circumstances immediately, but looking at that wider picture as part of the car parking strategy review. I understand, Chair, that that's come into this committee as a joint piece of work also of Strong Communities and Economy and Development Select, and welcome that dialogue as we go forward, because I think this is a critical point for us now as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. I mean, in some ways, it answers my question, and it's nice to know that piece of work is going to be coming on. If there's any way that I can be involved, being in a ward which is a commuter ward with 5 car parks and a train station, I would like to be. It does still worry me, I think, because we look at the pressure as you're naming it there, and it's not taking into account those factors. So I think it does still worry me that the wrong decisions are going to be made in this budgetary year, because we won't have done that piece of work to inform what we're going to do going forward in the budget. But I mean, there could be environment, I suppose, some kind, I suppose.
But I would stress that there are no proposals within this budget to increase car parking charges, none whatsoever. So so the comment you'd made just now can't apply.
I'm actually more concerned about reducing them rather than putting them up again. I think that the damage is already done by putting them up, and especially the fact that it's been taken in such a geographically intense way that Chepstow suffers the most from having the most paid car parks and very little free parking provision, in an area where we're supposed to be encouraging more footfall and public transport use. So I think that damage has already been done. What I want to do is actually see us make some decisions going in the right direction to reduce charge, provide more free capacity, and work towards our well-being and climate goals. So.
Well, that'll have to be part of the ongoing exercise, because again, there are no car parking proposals in this budget.
Thank you for that. Councillor Roden.
Thank you, Chair. Is my understanding correct in thinking that aspects of some funds, such as aggregate external funding, are unknown at present? And if that's the case, what degree of confidence do we have that we receive them? And if we don't, what would the impact be? Thanks.
We haven't had, Peter will come in on that, but we haven't had our final settlement yet, which ordinarily we would have had, but the general election put paid to all of the timetables on that. So no, we don't have our final settlement. We have to rely on information coming out of Welsh Government, and we will have to settle council tax only a day or two after probably hearing what the final settlement is. But I don't know what Peter wants to add to that.
It's only just one further comment, just to add, actually, in a perverse sense, the fact that the provisional settlement was so delayed, in an ordinary year, when we didn't have the likes of the election taking place, the delay in the spending review working its way through from Westminster. So in an ordinary year, the provisional settlement would have been received a good couple of months earlier, in sort of October time. The provisional settlement wouldn't have contained all the up-to-date data that the settlement team needs to feed through the settlement formula. So they would base that on a set of assumptions, thus it being provisional. Because the settlements come through late at the end of December, virtually all of the data that they need, Welsh Government, was included. So the Welsh Government, I was in discussion with the Welsh Government official week last Friday, and they confirmed that in fact they're not expecting to see any real movement now between provisional and final, which gives sort of a level of comfort in terms of the figure that we're sort of modelling in terms of the 3% increase. Funding floor aside, there is a high level of certainty that that will not change.
Thank you. That's reassuring. And secondly, if I may, coronavirus is in the news all the time. The issue may well escalate. Do we have any thoughts of the impact of that on us, bearing in mind a lot of Chinese manufacturers supply things to this country and they may be impacted? Thank you.
But the easiest answer is no. The WHO, the World Health Organization, hasn't declared it hasn't been escalated to that stage yet. It's, clearly they're looking to contain it within China. I guess if circumstances change, then I would expect UK government, Welsh Government, to put in place necessary arrangements in terms of assessing that. And that risk would then subsequently be assessed down at a local authority level. Very similar to, I guess, arrangements that were put in train around Brexit most recently. But in terms of an immediate risk, no, we're not undertaking any specific targeted work at the minute in terms of working that through. And I could probably offer a view that it would be very, very difficult to actually assess what that consequence and implication might be at this stage.
Councillor Strong.
Thanks, Chairman. It's just a quick comment on the Usk amenity site. Just to confirm what Francis said, and also the Town Council and County Council are working closely together, and in addition to the county-wide literature that's going out asking for comments, the Usk Town Council are also circulating their residents emphasising the fact that the black bags must be free of food waste, etc. And it'll be interesting to see over the next couple of months to see whether that is taken into account and the situation improves.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. Councillor Dovey, did you want to come in?
Is anybody go hammer? Oh, here we go. Thank you, Chairman. Many of the questions that I would have wanted to ask have been asked already by Councillor Davis and others. But perhaps I would like to ask a different question. And that basically is, here we are yet again, and I've been on these committees almost longer than anybody else has. Phil and I have been here for 10 years.
2004 we came in, David, so it's a bit longer than that.
It was something like that. And we have gone through this cascading period of years where we are always at the bottom of the pecking order when it comes to funding from Welsh Government. As somebody said here earlier, we would like to be in a position with regard to the city deal where we are in pole position. Well, if you look at the past experience for Monmouthshire County Council as a county, no matter what it does, it is never, ever in pole position. It is always at the bottom of the queue. That is the norm. And I think what I find really, really so discouraging, and it must be awful for the officers, is that the years come on and we've come in here and we sit down again and we go through all the same rigmarole, and basically what we're doing is bacon slicing the county and its reserves and its ability to run in a way that other counties are run when they have adequate reserves. So my question is really, how long can we carry on in this way? I mean, it is a fundamental question. We could talk about everything else that we talked about this morning. We can read all these briefs, all this work that goes into the trying to balance the books. And it is pretty heroic. I don't use that phrase lightly. Over past years, it is pretty heroic. If I was Phil, I'd probably be in a cell, dark room, with a lot of padding around it, or Phil out down in a local pub with a large bottle of whiskey. But the point I'm trying to make is the situation doesn't change for us. It gets consistently worse. And it cannot carry on getting worse. I think Phil said when we started this budget review before Christmas, he said we've said to the fact that we are really scraping the barrel at this time. Now, no council that is properly run, and this one is, should be put in a position that it is basically being punished for its success. And other councils within Wales who are not properly run are more than adequately funded to ensure that they don't end up in the position that we enjoy. So my question is, to the officers and anybody else who'd like to give it a shot, is how long do you think we're going to be able to sustain this position without somebody seeing the light in the assembly? Or maybe, and I am beginning to subscribe to this at a large event, they have a different agenda down in the assembly.
Thanks, Councillor Dovey. Given the political nature, it's probably reasonable for Phil to answer some of that, whether or not officers would want to add a view in terms of resource sustainability, but in terms of the political nature and in terms of potential mergers, formal mergers with other authorities. Do you want to say something, Phil?
Yes, I will, Chair, and I'll stay away from the politics as well. I think basically we ask ourselves that question every year, and it seems miraculously that every time we find, excuse me, find a way of reinventing it ourselves, that points us in a direction we hadn't seen before, and we seem to be able to do it again. But that's running out of steam. It's running rapidly out of steam. Clearly some movement in the way that the revenue support grant is looked at, well, in the whole of AEF for that matter. To that end, we're trying to persuade some other authorities to help us contribute to a fund that would enable us to get an independent examination done that can be put forward to Welsh Government to see whether or not we can persuade them to look at the formula. There's also, excuse me, there's all sorts of representations going on, always have been, and they're intensifying. But it isn't just a case of giving us more. There's pluses and minuses, and they've all got to be properly worked through. Sorry about my voice, Chair.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just want to just add a couple of things, really. I'm not going to answer the question in terms of the how long, because it's a bit of a how long's a piece of string, depending on what plays out, I guess. And there's a whole array of different factors with different degrees of certainty in terms of what may play out. We've had conversations today around social services, likely increase in demographic pressures, demand pressures, etc. And I think the translation of that, and I think in terms of where work's done between, I guess, as a local authority and with Phil, the leader, the cabinet members, and through the WLGA is this point around. There's two aspects around that. One is around making sure that local government gets sufficient recompense, which is that are so the narrative, the very focused narrative and the engagement and conversation between WLGA and Welsh Government leading up into the provisional settlement was about a funding around pay pressures, pressure we've talked about in adult social care and ALN. Because as what we've been through, the pressure are very within some areas funded for those. All right, and that we'd have steps to get that aspect apart. As Phil alludes to, is our fair funding as a result of the distribution in the formula. So the WLGA Rural Forum, which the leader sits on, they have agreed to undertake a piece of work to look in further detail. Our disadvantage in the formula is but significantly driven by our rurality. So working through and the forum undertaking. And I'm not on other that they're in. It's lucky to have the member and officer card that we do as council. If to be able to be resourceful, creative, and innovative, which is what we have doing in terms of to respond. Yes, there are concerns and anxieties around ongoing financial sustainability, but we take them in our stride. you know, we continue and maintain to put pressure on Welsh Government, again, back on that point around fair funding.
That comes just a short response, because I've got other councillors wishing to get it to come in. Okay. Oh, microphone. Can you put your microphone on as well? Thank you.
I think officer professional, and one would expect from an officer in views there are so many happening in and around Chepstow. For instance, there's a big demographic change. When it's only just walk across the bridge and flinging houses up there as fast as you can possibly go, and that is havoc on. So there is a lot happening, and I still maintain that we are unfairly treated as far as the Welsh Government is concerned, and as far as the funding that Monmouthshire gets. I would not rescind from that position.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Devi. I can see Councillor Harris, sorry, desperate to come in on this, and surely will counteract your arguments. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. I've been here this council time and time again. I'm asking now directly, as I've done many times before, as run the council for the government. Yes or no?
It's for them to form that it's got anything to do with their politics. It's the if you political answer, solution subgroup, we're always outvoted when it comes to that, but I don't think it's on political lines.
Thank you for that. The answer I've got here, and why I can't believe that is the case. And I don't know why he can't comprehend also 2000 has been to government by the government. Yeah.
Political work, really consensual manner.
Yes, I think we got to.
Thank you.
I don't do politics. In the Labour, the funding formula, and we have evidence to show that it's again. Therefore, it's not. But I don't understand. Be clear, and the independent, so that want politics know that we are that form. I think that is the case before the decision.
On the WL come in to, as it is in occasion. I think that is now has hit home with WLGA, and I'm assured and colleagues will be coming in. It will be after this obviously this settlement, but at the end of March, beginning of April, with us, so we can start to unpick some of the elements for our own benefit to understand. Yeah, not the potential review might be in train. Councillor Devi, you want to come back briefly? And as you said, I do want a political element.
I was not trying to be political, and I wasn't trying to be political, Roger. I didn't mention the Labour Party at all. I said the government. That's it. That's it. I didn't say it.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Go strong.
I'm wondering if it was Wilson. He's 50 of the Welsh industry deal 50 years. Obviously, that's completely altered later. aneurysm. It was, I'm sure, but it has now served its time and has at least clearly able to put things.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. I've got a few questions, and I suppose they're posed to Peter in terms of resource perspective. You know, looking at the biggest pressures, social care, in particular, I'll have to develop an interest here as an employee of the Directors of Social Services, so I'll make sure I fill in my pro forma afterwards. Previous pay, the social model is unsustainable. The social services, we've been receiving fund or change our service models to be more receptive to the citizen, user, carer. But you know, given those obviously those funding models, there's an expectation, there's an exit strategy to ensure that we move away from the grant funding in that model chain and in our future resource assumption. So you said, you know, we're saying that it needs to change from chief officer and obviously working with the social care to try and upside down control in terms of engagement with boards. Why the regional work in, you know, with regional power transfer that membership boards went on from looked after committed our children coming in reduction and in terms of decision making. But what in resources do you get to ensure prevention around the family, working hard? We've got what resource can we children come in terms of, you know, the regulatory through. I know there was raised a board, not just Wales, instead there was a